So good morning, everybody. Incredibly excited to see everyone in the room. Before I introduce President Collins formally, I want to begin by welcoming every single one of you. I certainly want to give a big shout out to our students. I understand that we have some nursing students, some science students, some business students, some 10,000 small business, Goldman Sachs, small business owners and students, and I'm sure students drawn from all across the college. So I know I'm speaking for Susan and everyone here. We're thrilled that you're here. Also to the Fed Reserve team that made the journey down from Boston, thank you. And to all of the faculty and staff and members of the administration that are here with us. I want to just give a brief overview of how we're going to spend the time together. President Collins is going to begin with her remarks. We're going to move over to CCRI's finest fireside chat space, and I will sort of start us off at that time with just with a fire starter. What you all should have seen when you walked in is a note card and a pen. President Collins, as you will soon learn if you don't already know, is a deeply experienced professor. So all of us who are professors in the room know we love when our students ask questions. Please, while you're listening to her, write a question. And you will hear this later in my prepared remarks when I introduce her. I think one of my favorite things about her, though, is she's a big believer in no question is not a good question. So if I will tell you, particularly with the students, if you know nothing about the Federal Reserve, I am confident you're in very good company, not just in this classroom, but in many other rooms. So just be brave, write your question, and she will look forward to answering it. Members of our teams will gather those questions, and we will bring forward as many as we can to Susan. So with that, I am going to move to the formal introduction. Last July, Susan Collins was appointed President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, which is part of the U.S. Central Bank. In her role, she oversees all of the bank's activities, including economic research and analysis, banking supervision and financial stability efforts, community economic development activities, and a wide range of payments, technologies, and finance initiatives. She also serves on the Federal Open Market Committee, which sets monetary policy for the United States. President Collins's extraordinary career includes being published widely and serving as a provost, dean, professor, research scholar, and board member at a variety of organizations and universities, including the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, where she served as director for 9 years. Prior to leading the Boston Fed, Susan served as provost and executive vice president for academic affairs at the University of Michigan, and was also the Edward M. Gramlich Collegiate Professor of Public Policy and Professor of Economics. Earlier in her career, President Collins spent 16 years living in Massachusetts, beginning as a Harvard undergraduate, earning a PhD in economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and serving as an assistant, then associate professor at Harvard. So how to explain today's visit? President Collins has dedicated significant time in her first year leading the Boston Fed to immersing herself in the New England region for which she is responsible. As Fed president, Susan is asked often to lecture at elite colleges and universities across the country. And that's no surprise, of course. While I am confident President Collins will indeed engage brilliantly at these fine institutions, I am delighted to share with you all that she has chosen to make her first visit to a college since assuming leadership of the Boston Fed right here at CCRI. And so what does the visit signify? I believe it clearly communicates President Collins's understanding of the critical role community colleges and community college graduates play in building a vibrant and inclusive economy that works for all. In January, I was appointed to the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and over the last 6 months, I have been privileged to watch President Collins in action. She is brilliant, she is principled, and she is exceptionally focused on ensuring the Federal Reserve Bank meets its mission. President Collins, you honor us today with your visit. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to CCRI to deliver remarks. Have fun.
Thank you very much for that really incredible introduction and for hosting me and my team here today. And also for your wonderful contributions as a director. We really appreciate that. So good morning to everybody. It is just such a true pleasure for me to be here with you at CCRI. I'm absolutely delighted. It's also really fun for me to be back on a campus. Spent most of my career as President Hughes, as Megan mentioned, in higher education, and really dear to my heart in a number of different ways. Since I started my job about 10 months ago, being out and meeting with stakeholders, people involved in our economy in different ways, has really just been a key focus for me, and I'll say a little bit more about that. As you've already heard, the way that I like to talk about what the mission of the Federal Reserve is fostering a vibrant, inclusive economy that works for everyone, not just an economy that works for some people. And in that context, it really is essential for us to connect with and to learn from people across the district who experience our economy in so many different ways and contexts. The Boston Fed's district is essentially New England, and I really have enjoyed opportunities like this one to be out and about and visiting different parts of that district. So in my initial remarks today, I'm going to talk a bit about what we at the Fed are doing and also what you here at CCRI are doing in order to foster a vibrant and inclusive economy. And given my own background as a professor, dean, provost, as you've already heard, I've been fortunate to get a lot of invitations from higher ed institutions, and this really is my first talk at a college since I became Boston Fed president. And that's because I really wanted my first visit with faculty, students, those who are involved in education to be at a community college. And I'll say a bit more about that. So what I'd like to do in my remarks before we start our conversation and turn to questions is really touch briefly on three things. First, I want to talk about why I wanted to prioritize speaking at a community college like CCRI, and why community colleges and all of the people who engage with them are really critical to a vibrant and inclusive economy, so important to our society more broadly as well. Then I do want to talk briefly about some of the things that we do at the Federal Reserve, including monetary policy. And finally, I'll share just a couple of lessons that I've learned from my own career path, just hoping that some of those experiences might be helpful and interesting to you as well. But before I begin, I always have to give a bit of a disclaimer. My remarks today are my own. I'm not speaking for any of the other policymakers in the Federal Reserve, either at one of the banks or the Board of Governors. So community colleges, and you all know this, but I don't know that it's as well known as it needs to be. Community colleges provide affordable, accessible higher education to millions of learners from all different backgrounds. They support a wide range of needs for students, employers, communities, and provide opportunities for upward mobility. And community college students especially really exemplify working hard, juggling so many different kinds of responsibilities while developing additional skills that enable you to contribute to the economy both today but also in the future. I, in that context, particularly do want to acknowledge the cohort of entrepreneurs and owners of small business who I understand are here. Delighted to have you joining us as well today. You also play a key role in a vibrant economy. As I travel around New England and talk with employers, one of the most prevalent themes that I hear is the need for skilled personnel, people who can power organizations and industries. And in fact, our region's labor market provides lots of opportunities for good jobs that enable people to prosper and to thrive, but those jobs require all kinds of skills, and those skills are evolving. So I want to congratulate all of you for investing in yourselves and in your skills here at CCRI. Doing that is not only good for you and your families, it's also helpful for organizations and communities that make up our economy. As a policymaker, it's really essential to me that our economy does provide opportunities for everyone, not just for some. And again, that makes community colleges like CCRI really important in the higher education landscape and skill development and workforce development more broadly. At the Fed, part of our mandate from Congress is to use our tools to maximize employment. So if things like lack of childcare, lack of affordable housing, if those are things that prevent some people from participating in the job market and in the economy, then we need to study those impediments, and we need to deepen our understandings of the obstacles they present, and to find ways working together that can help to address those challenges. The Boston Fed has been doing this through our research-based Working Places program, for example, and that has 30 different locations across New England, including here in Rhode Island in Cranston, Newport, and Providence. Working Places encourages and fosters local cross-sector collaboration, and collaboration is actually one of the themes that you'll hear me talk about because I think it's so important to both understand but also address challenges and take advantage of opportunities. So Working Places encourages and fosters local leaders to collaborate across different sectors to identify the issues that they're facing and find ways to work on solutions that address those complex problems. So in fact, at the Federal Reserve, our portfolio of activities is much more extensive than most people realize. So monetary policy is in the news all the time, especially at the moment, and I'll have a bit more to say about that. But things like our Working Places initiative, I think is an example of something that we do that not so many people are aware of. And so I'd like to speak just briefly about the breadth of ways that we at the Fed work to achieve our mission. The Fed, as was already mentioned, is the central bank of the United States and was created almost 110 years ago by Congress. And so I'm just going to mention 4 of the key ways that we advance our mission. One is that we provide a lot of back-end infrastructure, almost the plumbing that underpins the financial system, supporting stable, reliable payments that people and organizations throughout our economy depend on. Think about everything from cash and direct deposits, wire transfers, to a new service that we'll be launching in late July. So we're about to unveil it. That's called the FedNow Instant Payments. It's actually the first new payments rail or infrastructure that the Fed has built in 50 years. And it will allow individuals and businesses to send and receive instant payments and have access to funds immediately. And so that's something that you'll probably be hearing more about in the coming weeks and months. Second, we supervise some of the country's banks for safety and soundness, fair lending and community reinvestment, and we serve as a lender of last resort to the financial system to ensure liquidity and support financial stability. Third, we work to support community economic development initiatives, and I mentioned one of them just a moment ago, the Working Places program. And fourth, and very importantly, obviously, we conduct monetary policy in pursuit of the dual mandate from Congress that is to promote price stability and maximum employment. And I just want to say a bit more about this piece of our work. To me, maximum employment means the broad, inclusive goal of job opportunities for all. And price stability means inflation that's low and stable enough so that people aren't thinking about inflation. They're focused on other activities in their lives. Well, inflation at 2%, which is the target that the Fed has discerned, has defined, is low enough to accomplish that goal. But as you all know, prices have been rising more rapidly than that, and there's lots of attention on inflation. In my conversations with people across the region, I've heard from small business owners who are ending projects due to cost increases. I've heard from workers who have to take on additional jobs in order to make ends meet, given the high rising prices on necessities, and from many, many other examples of the cost of inflation as well. These and other discussions are really a constant reminder that inflation impacts all of us, impacts everybody, and it's particularly challenging for those with lower incomes. And the Federal Reserve has been responding forcefully to make sure that high inflation does not become entrenched. And here I do want to note that wage increases that are just simply chasing higher prices don't make workers better off. They just fuel more inflation. What really matters for workers are wage increases, are gains that are inflation adjusted or real increases in wages. So I actually see the two dimensions of the Fed's mandate, price stability and maximum employment, as intertwined, especially over the medium to long run. Low predictable inflation is needed in order to foster conditions that promote a vibrant, resilient, and inclusive economy, and also for maximum employment that's sustainable over time. And this is really a key reason why I believe it is so important for us to remain resolute in bringing inflation back down to the 2% target in a reasonable amount of time. There's several factors behind the inflation that we've been experiencing, but ultimately it reflects demand outpacing supply that results in pressures on wages and prices that fuel that inflation. The Fed raising interest rates is intended to slow spending, cool the labor market, and bring demand back into alignment with supply. And since March of 2022, the Fed has raised rates from near zero to just over 5%, with the most recent increase occurring just a few weeks ago. And the recent stresses in the banking system are likely to further tighten credit conditions for businesses and consumers, which also would cool demand. So while inflation is still too high, there are some promising signs of moderation, and I believe that we may be at or near the point where monetary policy can pause raising interest rates, and this will provide an opportunity to more fully assess the impact of the actions we've taken to date and the general tightening of credit conditions on economic activity. But I also believe that it's really important for us to make each policy decision based on a holistic assessment of information that's available at the time the decisions are made. And the next policy meeting will be in mid-June, a few weeks from now. In the meantime, we continue to monitor a wide range of data about price developments, labor markets, financial conditions, and much, much more in order to evaluate how the economy is doing. So let me turn for just a moment to my own career path, and I just want to mention a few dimensions of my own journey, and then I'll wrap things up and we can turn to our conversation and questions. First, I was inspired to be a lifelong learner by my parents and relatives, and I realize that not everyone has some of the kinds of support that I was really blessed to have. But I do hope that you'll be inspired by those you meet here at CCRI to never stop learning and developing your skills. The pace of change in our economy and the skills that it requires make that essential. And being a lifelong learner is something that's brought me a lot of joy, and I hope it does for all of you as well. During my studies, I encountered instructors who were inspiring, challenging, and often both. But it was really the challenging ones who taught me the most. And so I want to encourage you to seek out opportunities to stretch yourselves. Maybe by asking questions to make sure you've really mastered a subject, taking a class here that would really push you. I know that there are many people around here at CCRI who care deeply about your success. Seek out those who will inspire and also will challenge you. And throughout my career, I've been fortunate to have encouragement from friends and family, especially my husband and my now adult children. And again, I realize that not everyone is so fortunate, but I do just want to say that it's vital to have allies and supporters as you do the hard work of juggling everything, both while you're attending school and in the future. And so I want to encourage you to seek out allies, but perhaps most importantly, to be an ally. I found that working together, building networks and partnerships is a key to success, whether in school, in a new job, and certainly as president of the Boston Fed. So let me close by encouraging you to keep at what you're doing here at CCRI and really embrace being a lifelong learner. I have so much respect for all of you who are here, who are working so hard to broaden your skills. You're building a more prosperous future for yourselves, but also for our economy. It's important for all of us. So as somebody who thinks about and works on our economy all of the time, I want to thank you, the students, and also all of the instructors, your supporters, and all of the staff here at CCRI. You know, it takes everybody working together for helping to build a vibrant, high-skill, inclusive economy in Rhode Island and beyond. So with that, again, I'm just so delighted to be here with all of you today. Thank you for hosting me, and I look forward to the conversation and to your questions. Should we switch with the mics, or does it matter?
Sure, let's do it.
No, okay.
Yeah. So we're going to gather the questions. I watched a lot of our students listening carefully and nodding, which tells me at least some of you have had some economics. So while our folks are gathering those, I'll start us off just with a reflection, actually, that could have been said by any, I think, successful professional, and that is your sort of call and challenge to our students to seek out the professors that challenge you. And so it immediately sort of made visual for me some of my most challenging professors that I studied under. And so I would just sort of flag that and say, I completely agree with you. Really looking for the ones who are not just going to rubber stamp and say that everything you've done is brilliant, but are actually going to say, that's a good job. I wonder if we can take it even further. And Susan and I have the advantage of looking out in the room and knowing by name the extraordinary professors here, and every single one of them embodies what you're describing. And so, with that, I appreciate you sort of setting the stage for how you are sort of looking at the economy here in the United States. And I think I'll ask what is probably on everyone's mind. And that is, I think every single one of us lives it. We're living in a complicated economy. That's true in Rhode Island as it is in so many other places. And so the question is, do you think we are facing a recession?
So thanks for starting there. I actually, often there are elephants in the room, and I think it is better to talk about them. So let me start by saying that I call myself a realistic optimist. I'm realistic because I totally recognize that we live in an incredibly complex economy. There are lots of risks, lots of uncertainties. We've seen that over recent years, that a number of things have happened, from pandemic, war in Europe, all kinds of things that weren't expected and have had implications that have been very hard to forecast. So recognizing uncertainties, risks, I do see a pathway. My baseline outlook is one in which, through our actions, we are successful in slowing the economy. And as I said, there's some signs of some of that moderation, bringing inflation down, perhaps with some increase in unemployment, but I do not, in my baseline, forecast a significant downturn. And I think that's important to say, because to me, one of the risks that I continue to be concerned about is the possibility of what could be almost a self-fulfilling view that conditions are really going to deteriorate. I mean, there are a number of people that I've talked to visiting. I was in New Hampshire just 2 days ago, and a number of business owners said to me, I'm really positive about my own business's outlook. I'm just worried about lots of other people, and therefore, well, that's a dynamic that is one of the risks I think that we face. So, I do think it's going to take some time. Some of the declines we've seen so far in inflation have been a little slower than I might have anticipated, but we are starting to see some positive movements, and I do think that, again, we can get there without a significant downturn, recognizing that there are a number of risks that we face and uncertainties.
So I love where you landed, and before I move then to the first question, I think, as you know, I'm chair of the Greater Providence Chamber, and where she just took us, if you were following, is this sort of discrepancy between consumer confidence, consumer sentiment, and then what some of the numbers reveal. And it's precisely what I experience sitting as the chair of the chamber on a monthly basis, the big economic outlook breakfast we just hosted with the CEO of Santander, and we did a live sort of survey with 800 sort of business folks in the room. And when the question was something like, do you think your business is doing worse, better, or the same right now than it was several years ago? The vast majority said the same or better. And when a similar question was something like, and if you look ahead to next year, again, the majority said the same or better. But when it moved to essentially, what about the Rhode Island economy writ large, and even sort of out one more concentric circle, the US economy, it was everything's terrible and it's going to get worse. And so I'm fascinated in terms of the impact of that and how sort of we can, I, like you, I think, am a pretty grounded optimist, and just keeping our eye on sort of shaping perception actually can have an impact. And so as I'm looking, I know as the small business owners, you need us all to be saying things are going to be okay and keep investing and keep spending. So with that, we started with a question that is really about when you put your suit on and you're leading the Fed, particularly for the students here. I want to shift just momentarily and I think really encourage the students to remember that President Collins did not come into this world as a PhD economist. She came into this world just like the rest of us. And so I would love, to the degree you're comfortable, just say, can you share with the room, a challenge that you have had to work on professionally, and just sort of open it up so that folks can see that brilliant as you are also entirely human. So let me turn it over to you.
Sure. The one that I would talk about is actually stage fright. And, I now do all kinds of speaking engagements and actually enjoy it. And a lot of people are surprised to hear that I got really severe stage fright earlier in my life. And it was something I grappled with because there were things I wanted to be able to do, but not being comfortable speaking in front of groups kind of got in the way. And there really were three things as I thought back to how I got to a place where I'm actually much more comfortable. One of them was really a change in mindset, which is interesting. So many people would say, oh, don't worry, you'll be fine, it'll be great. And that actually made it worse. It made me more anxious because it just kind of raised the bar. It's like, oh my gosh, they're expecting, even more from me. And then that just, but shifting the mindset to, instead of thinking, oh no, I'm really nervous about this, to thinking, well, of course I'm nervous about this. I care about relating, I care about sharing information. Why wouldn't I be nervous? That kind of mindset was really helpful to me, and it also connected to my wanting to be a learner. I never think I know everything. I'm always hoping to learn more. And so if the mindset is, well, of course I'm nervous, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna expect I won't be perfect at it, I'll make mistakes, and then I'm gonna learn, how can I do it better? So the first one was really that mindset, and and then I actually started telling when people said, well, of course you'll be great. I was like, don't say that. So advice to all of you when you're helping someone else get through stage fright, that's not, for many of us, a helpful way to say it. The other thing is I'm a preparer. So whether it is giving a dry run in the mirror or having a friend or family member, listen and just kind of going through it, especially when I was first starting, I, really believe in preparing. And then practice really does help. And so over time, I still, when I was teaching the first day of the semester, even if I taught a class many, many times, my heart would be pounding when I would start. And so, but I would think, okay, that's where my energy comes from. I care about this, I care about my class. And so that's one that, I like sharing with people because sometimes challenges actually enable you to get good at something because you have a deeper understanding of it, and then you can also talk to other people about it. So appreciate the question.
So I love that answer. I was able to sort of watch students' reactions. Raise your hand if you've never been nervous giving a presentation in a college classroom. Right. And by the way, anybody that would raise their hand, I would want to have a further conversation because what I heard you say, so I just want to elevate two things I heard. And the reason why I said what I just said, it's because you care. You actually care about doing a good job. So it's therefore harness that sort of nervousness and use it as a strength. The first thing you said made me smile because I can tell you, despite my enormous respect for your two alma maters, what I know CCRI students have in spades, and that is a competitive advantage, is an adaptable mindset. So there are many students in this room that I know by name, and that's what you all specialize in. When one door closes, you open up a new one. So I'm looking at Vanessa in the back. I'm looking at Lauren right here. I don't know when you all learned that, but you're already fluent in that practice. And so I hope to every student in this room, what you heard President Collins just say, you really name your assets at figuring out that concept of mindset, because I'm confident every single one of you is already doing that. So with that, it looks like we have a bunch of questions. So I think I'm just going to jump in. This is going to be fun. I feel like this is the Johnny Carson show or something. That said, because Susan and I may be the only two people other than Jack Renza that knows what I'm talking about. You guys can Google it later. The question. Do you know if digital currency will be making a large impact in the coming years of our world?
So digital currency is a really interesting topic, and there is, of course, a lot of attention and interest, and different countries are exploring digital currencies in different ways. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, and so I don't know, what will happen over time. I do think there's a lot of attention to a variety of different types of digital payments and digital things. I will also say that the Federal Reserve, the Boston Fed, partnered with MIT on a project that has recently wrapped up called the Hamilton Project that really tried to say, if we were asked by Congress to develop a digital currency, technically, how would you actually do that in a place with the scale and complexity of the United States? And there's kind of open source code and all kinds of information about that project. Again, that was a partnership, and a little bit of a theme there, that is posted and available for people who are interested. I think it's something to watch. For our country, it would be a congressional decision about whether to move forward with it. And it really is something that's quite interesting, and so great to hear that people are watching and following that.
Thank you for the question. This has got to be on everybody's mind. Will the debt ceiling be raised in order to avoid a default?
So again, I don't have a crystal ball there. I will say that the debt ceiling is really all about fiscal policy. It's our elected officials, the administration and Congress, who are the ones who determine taxation decisions, spending decisions, and also the debt ceiling and whether to raise it or not. Not raising the debt ceiling would imply that we would not be able to pay bills that we have already committed to. That would be a type of a default. And the consequences, we'd be in uncharted territory. The consequences for that could be quite severe. And so I will reiterate comments that Chair Powell and others have made, that it's really important that we meet our obligations. And I very much hope that that is what happens.
Thank you. How will the federal bank continue to lessen the gap and disparity of the cost of living in the economy, as well as the prices of living day by day?
Let me take a couple of pieces of that. So as I talked about briefly in my remarks, and one of the earlier questions, we are increasing interest rates to slow demand and reduce the gap between demand and supply. That's really a key part of what is fueling inflation. And that will help to reduce the rate at which the prices of goods and services that that households and businesses have to deal with, to reduce the rate at which those are increasing and help to make things more affordable. Part of the question was also asking more about disparities, and what I will say there is that there are a number of different types of persistent disparities in our economy. There are disparities in unemployment rates, there are disparities in wealth. impediments and disparities that interfere with the extent to which some members of our society are able to contribute to the labor force, contribute to the economy more generally, to me restrains our potential growth, our potential prosperity, our potential well-being. And that's why those types of disparities are one of the things that we focus on at the Federal Reserve through some of the research that we do, through some of the partnerships, and through some of our initiatives in our community development department, such as the Working Places one that I mentioned before, which really focuses on struggling cities and rural areas, bringing people together to identify key issues to work on and then try to address them. A lot of that is about taking places that aren't thriving or groups that aren't thriving and finding ways to both understand the challenges and the gaps better and to work together to address them.
So that question and your response, I think, really sets up the next question. And one of the things I've attempted to do as a director is bring forward to your attention and to your team's attention about the really shocking lack of affordable housing in the state of Rhode Island. And as I'm certain you know, and many people in this room, the greatest builder of wealth in this country is home ownership. And the previous question really talked about disparities, and we know, and it's exceptionally well documented, that there are historic systems inside the United States based in race and based in ethnicity that determined who could and who could not secure a mortgage, purchase a home. And so with that, mortgage rates feel so high compared to pre-pandemic levels. Nearly all of the apartments in my area are more than 30% of my income. What should I do? What do we need to do as a country about affordable housing for middle-class families?
The housing issues are significant and acute. Let me say just a little bit about that. It's a big topic, obviously. There've been housing challenges well before the pandemic, and the pandemic exacerbated them in a variety of different contexts. If you look at the New England economy, pre-pandemic, shelter housing prices were actually increasing more slowly than the national average. But if you look more recently, that's flipped for New England. And part of the reason is that, as people could work remotely, many people actually recognized just, the attractiveness of other places, and that some other places were perhaps a little less expensive. Boston has seen a number of people move further out, and that has pushed up housing prices even more rapidly. And the higher interest rates also mean that a number of people who might, in other contexts, have been either downsizing, so selling a large home to move into a smaller one, or expanding because their family's growing from, that there's very little inventory in the market. So in terms of the housing market, prices have increased rapidly and are very high. So that is absolutely true, and that's a problem that's going to take time to address. Mm-hmm. Rents also, had a similar kind of dynamic, increased very rapidly. Here in Rhode Island, in part because of its location, the average cost of housing is high relative to the average income. And that's partly because of the proximity to other, very high-priced places like Boston. People come here and push up those places. So those prices. So I'm giving some of the reasons why the prices are so high. Unfortunately, I don't think there are nice silver bullets that, just do this and then we fix the housing problem quickly. It's going to take lots of people working together to find solutions, partnerships between private sector, public sector, governments, and I don't think it's going to be a one-size-fits-all. I think there are going to be a variety of different kinds of initiatives that is what it's going to take to address the housing challenges more broadly. And again, that's something that the Fed is quite interested in. It is an impediment for many people and creates some of the kinds of gaps I was talking about before. One final thing I'll say about that is that next week, the Boston Fed is hosting an event that we call Fed Listens, and it's an opportunity for us to bring people with knowledge and expertise from around New England to talk with us about key challenges. And one of the sessions will focus explicitly on housing to help us understand more deeply what some of those challenges are, what people are experiencing, what some of the opportunities and possibilities might look like. That is actually going to be public, live streamed, and so people are interested, that's something that you might take a look at. I think it'll also be recorded, so people can go back and take a look as well.
So thank you for that. You know, I keep my eye closely on the housing situation in Rhode Island because I know it impacts the people that work at the college, and it impacts our students, and perhaps others in this room listened to our local NPR station this morning, and sort of the central topic was housing. And so I think the first thing I would say is the change and the solutions are not coming nearly quickly enough. The Rhode Island Foundation commissioned a study from the Boston Consulting Group that was released maybe a month ago. And unfortunately, Rhode Island has sort of several distinctions that we would not want. So we are number one nationally in terms of the age of our housing as it currently stands, and we're sort of I think top 3 or 5 lowest in terms of new units that are being built. So whoever wrote that question, you're living exactly what the study uncovered. I think I would share some, I would say, measured optimism about what I do see happening in Rhode Island that does feel measurably different from even 3 years ago. And I believe that is largely due to the activism of affordable housing groups in the state who have brought it right to the front door of the State House, literally, and have made their voices heard, so that we are seeing, for the first time in my recollection, both the Speaker, the Senate President, and the Governor not looking away from that issue, putting significant state funding into it, setting up a Secretary of Housing, and you know, one of the leading sort of nonprofit executives in this space, you know, this morning said a version of what I just said, and said, you know, I feel some optimism, and you know, here's the evidence for the optimism, and we'll see. And so students are famous for many things, and that's been true since the French Revolution. Be activists, so make your voices heard. It is making a difference, and you deserve to be able to raise your families in Rhode Island and have healthy, secure, affordable housing. You know, Susan, before we came into the room, one of the things we talked about is what a mystery what the Fed actually does every day is to most Americans, not just the people in this room. So I'm going to start with a question that's been written, and maybe once you've answered that, you could speak a little bit more broadly of sort of the Fed 101, and you delivered some of that in your remarks, but I think coming back at it a second time would be really helpful for the room. So the question is, do the local branches of the Fed have input in the decisions of the increases and or decreases of the interest rates?
One word answer, yes, but let me explain. So the decisions, 8 times a year, the Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, gets together and makes monetary policy decisions. The policymakers who are around the table are all 12 of the Reserve Bank presidents, and so, you know, I as a Boston Fed president am one of those 12, and the other 11 presidents, as well as the, it would be 7 if a full complement, there's 1 vacant seat at the moment, governors who are based in Washington, D.C. And just very quickly, that it's a 2-day meeting, typically most of the day on a Tuesday, and then Wednesday morning, and then after that there's a kind of statement decision announced, and the chair has a press conference and answers questions about the why and the thinking behind it, et cetera. Those decisions, of course, there's a lot of prep that happens all the time in advance, understanding what's happening with the economy, but the actual meeting, there's kind of 2 key parts. One is an economic focused set of discussions where there are briefings and each of us gives our own views of what the economic context is. And that's really interesting because we have different views and we're sharing those and learn from one another. And then the second part is the policy go-round, where again, there are policy alternatives that were presented, and then each of us shares our own view about what the appropriate policy is given our own perspective. All of the policymakers share that information. The meeting ends with a vote, and there are 12 voters, all of the governors, and 5 presidents, and who is a voting president rotates. New York does all the time. I was voting in 2022, and then we'll vote again in 2025. So it's a kind of a interesting, complex structure. But yes, and I think it's really important to reiterate that a range of views is shared around that table and is part of the context in which those policy decisions are made. And people don't always agree on things. In fact, just yesterday, the minutes from our last meeting were made public. They're made public with a lag of a few weeks. So in terms of the range of things that we do, again, monetary policy is in the news, and I think it's important and helpful for people to know a bit about how we do that and the whys, and that's one of the things that I appreciate opportunities to talk about. We also do a lot of research work on a wide range of different kinds of things, everything from inflation dynamics to we're doing quite a bit of work as part of our regional and community development department on childcare. And I mentioned that briefly before. Housing and childcare are among, and the kind of worker shortages and challenges of hiring, those are the things that I've particularly heard a lot about in the past 10 months. Childcare has been a long-standing major issue. People often don't think of it as an economic issue. It absolutely is, because it influences not only how the extent to which many people are able to participate in the economy, and it also is foundational for future workers, and so it's important in a variety of different contexts. So research on a wide range of things, the kind of community development and engagement that I talked about, work on our payment system, and things like understanding both the technological dimensions and also dimensions of inclusion. We haven't talked a lot in this gathering about our banking system, but many of the banks in New England are supervised by the Boston Fed. And so we're also charged with the safety and soundness of our banking system, as well as broader stability of our financial system and our payments system, which I mentioned briefly. So it's a pretty broad portfolio, and all of those really are focused on a mission of a vibrant, inclusive economy. And from my perspective, with that lifelong learner, means really interesting work that I would love to have more people know about. So you can all talk a little bit more about the Fed with people that you talk to. Did you know?
Okay, so that's the assignment. At everyone's dinner table tonight, just whip out something and see what the reaction is from your dinner table and report back to me, and I'll share it with President Collins. Before I get to the next couple of questions, which I love, I think they're going to sort of, as a preview, I'll tell you, they're going to take you back to sort of the beginning of your career. I just want to highlight one thing that I heard you say, and that I know, having spoken with both of them, you have in common with now Secretary Raimondo, formerly Governor Raimondo, and Secretary of the Treasury Yellen. And for me, obviously, as a female and the first female president at this college, and for all the female students in this room, I think it underscores the importance of gender in leadership positions. So you talked about childcare. And I know there are a whole lot of fathers in this room and a whole lot of sons. And I know I'm married to one and have 2 sons. I fully understand that you also understand the importance. But I just want to sort of acknowledge that if I were a betting person, I would bet that 50 years ago, you didn't have a lot of Fed Reserve presidents who were talking about the importance of childcare as a vital contributor to the success or slowing of an economy. So. Important to name. All right, so these are 2 fantastic questions.
What led you to pick economics as your major in college, and what was the hardest class you ever took?
Ooh, okay. So what led me to pick economics? There were really a couple things. I will say that one was how I grew up. So my parents are both Jamaican. I grew up, though, in New York. My dad worked at the United Nations. He was a social anthropologist, and he worked on a lot of kind of global issues, youth, how do you support youth in developing countries, the brain drain. And it was a very interdisciplinary environment. And he used to come home and he would really complain about the economists because, they talked in all these equations. He's like, no one understands them. You can't argue with them. And even when they're wrong, sometimes they win the day. And so when I was growing up, my view was, well, I want to win the argument. So I'm going to look into this economics thing, even though I didn't really understand exactly what it was. And that really was one of my motivators because, I was an ambitious little girl and wanted to be able to, to make a difference in different ways. And then when I got to college and I took economics classes, for me, they really resonated for a couple of reasons. One was I liked the structure. I liked the idea of having a framework in order to make sense of complex issues. And a lot of people kind of knock economics because some of the models are so simplistic, but that's just a starting point. It kind of gives you a base for understanding and tweaking and changing assumptions. And I liked that structure. I also liked the fact that to major in economics, you need to know a little bit of everything, right? I mean, I like data analysis, actually looking at the real world and using real data to test hypotheses. I've dreamed up this idea. Is that really consistent with the world or not? So I actually like statistics, I know, but because it enables you to test hypotheses and to learn things. Psychology is really relevant for economics. I mean, so everything from a number of social sciences to math and statistics and the range of different things that I could touch on, I found really interesting. So it was really that set of things and the fact that it enabled me to make a bit more sense of things that I'd puzzled about. I grew up in Manhattan. We spent a lot of summers in Jamaica. My dad worked at the UN, so we went on home leave. And Kingston and Manhattan are really different places. And, I always tell the story, you go to the beach and there'd be kids doing exchange rate arbitrage in their heads. And my parents' friends would say things like, why do you have to have different currencies? Because it's too complicated. These kids were obviously incredibly smart. So it wasn't smarts, which was why living standards were so different. That was incredibly evident to me as a kid. I wanted to understand why are standards of living so different here. And so that really did lead me to think over time about macroeconomics, and that was international economics and econometrics are what I ended up focusing on in graduate school. So in terms of my hardest subjects, it was really the subjects that had the most challenging teachers. The two things I'm focused on, one was international macroeconomics, and I had this incredibly difficult teacher at MIT who became my advisor, and I learned a huge amount from him because he challenged us, right? I mean, he really did. And some of the statistics classes. I mean, they didn't come easily to me. I wanted to be able to learn them, and so I really, pushed and stuck with it. So those were two that were particularly challenging, but also really rewarding.
So I've been told by our teams we have one final question. And I really appreciate in your previous response, Susan, particularly for our students, sort of telling your origin story and tying that to what really made you curious about the world and led you to choosing economics. Makes a lot of sense. So the final question, what prompted you to have a career change, to make a career change from teaching and university administration to working for the Federal Reserve?
Thank you for that question. It's interesting because I see a lot of similarities between what I have done earlier in my career and what I'm doing now. In particular, working at a public university is very much working in a mission-driven organization, and that's something that, there's a bigger purpose for the work that we're doing collectively. And so in that sense, the kind of broad public mission of the Federal Reserve feels similar to me to the way I thought about, especially my job as provost. I miss teaching. I love working with students. I love thinking about ideas and doing some of those research projects. Over time, I increasingly wanted to make more of a difference in an organization, and administration is one way to do that. At the same time, I felt like I was getting further and further away from what I really invested in, which is understanding the macroeconomy and making a difference in that context. And so going back to focusing on what I had done most of my studies in and what I had done research on actually feels to me like it's going, I was moving a bit further away from the balance that was what I most cared about. And so I'm, honored, thrilled. It's a huge responsibility, but also a great opportunity to be in the Boston Fed. And it feels to me like the various things I've done have really come together very nicely in this job. So it doesn't feel to me like it is as big a change as it might look like from the outside. But always delighted to be back in a college and a classroom, so lecture hall.
So appreciate that insight, and makes perfect sense to me. So I think this is the moment where I say deep thanks to you and invite the room to join me in a round of applause for President Collins.
Thank you all.
All right, so we have about 15 minutes for folks that would like to introduce themselves to Susan, and we have some time for photos. I'm going to turn that over to others to organize. My call to action for the students is I expect to get an email or come visit my office and tell me about whatever you brought to your dinner table. And Vanessa and Lauren, I know where to find you. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you all. Really a pleasure.
Phenomenal. Great job.